So good afternoon. Thank you, Hakan. Welcome to everyone, both in the virtual room and around the world participating via YouTube. Thank you very much for having myself and the other guests on this during this important event. I'm going to introduce Rabbi Burton Visotzky, PhD, is the Appelman Professor of Midrash and Interreligious Studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary here in New York, where he is the director of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue. He was the winner of the 2012 Gold Zeher Prize for his work in Muslim-Jewish engagement. He is a member of the Board of Governors of the International Jewish Community for Interreligious Consultations and serves on the United Nations Multi-Faith Advisory Committee. Welcome, Bert.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you the floor. If you could give us the highlights of your article that was published in the Fountain before we have a conversation between ourselves. The article is titled, "Find a Teacher for Yourself."
Thank you, Emre. So my article covered the issue of how you find a teacher for yourself, and I took the opportunity to talk about some of my teachers. First, I went back 45 years to when I was a young student in seminary and recounted a story about my Talmud professor, the late Rabbi Saul Lieberman, who was one of the great Talmud teachers of the 20th century. And he had a colleague who was also my colleague, Professor Morton Smith. Morton Smith was a professor of ancient history at Columbia University and also an Episcopal priest. I also talked about one of my other teachers for New Testament, who was a Roman Catholic priest, Father Raymond Brown. And finally, the most recent of my rabbis, if you will, who is, of course, Haj Effendi Gulen, who I had the opportunity to meet with Emre a few months ago, and it was one of the highlights of my life.
Bert, might you be able to give us a kind of a background to your relationship with Gulen? When and how did you come across his teachings?
Well, I have been very fortunate, first of all, to be a reader of the Fountain for many years now, and I'm grateful to the Fountain for publishing my article. And if you aren't regular readers, you should be. I have been working, alhamdulillah, with the Hizmet Turks for many years now in New York City. And we have done programming together, particularly at this holy season of the year, where for many years we have done interfaith iftar dinners for the Muslim community, the Jewish community, and the broader New York community. And that has always been a very, very positive event. Of course, you can't work with Hizmet Turks without hearing about our teacher, Gulen. Imam Gulen is a very important voice in interfaith activities, and we respect him, and the opportunity to meet him gave me the opportunity to talk about the current situation in North America, but worldwide, where there is increasing anti-Semitism and there is increasing Islamophobia. And we had the opportunity to talk about ways in which, through educating the broad public about Judaism and about Islam, we could reduce Islamophobia and reduce anti-Semitism, inshallah.
And in regards to relations between Muslims and Jews, you mentioned that in the article. What are the main lessons you've learned from the various teachers you've had over the decades in regards to bringing these two important minority faiths together?
Well, I think, Emre, you've said it well, that in North America, Islam and Judaism are minority faiths. And as minority faiths, we have great opportunity to be allies in the greater Christian community to fight for our rights, whether it's head coverings for men and women, or kosher or halal food, or things like that. But as well, one of the things I've learned in my study of Islam is how much Judaism and Islam share in common, whether it's about food or about ritual. And the fact is that both Jews and Muslims, and for here, I also want to include Christians, of course, all of the Abrahamic religions are great believers in feeding the hungry and caring for the needy and giving poor people housing, and also now, these days, also medical care. These are the things that make our communities stand out as leading communities in America.
Now, in regards to your engagement with Gulen, of course, that's a rare treat, both in terms of his schedule and his health, and it's even more rare, obviously, these days and probably going into the future. What were the main highlights for you in regards to your visit to meet Mr. Gulen?
Well, I want to say, and one of the things that just not only impressed me, it wowed me, was that when I came into the room, Imam Gulen was sitting in a chair, and as I came in, even though he was ill, he got up from his chair and said, "Rabbi, I insist you sit in my seat." And even though I demurred a couple of times, no, please go, sit down, he made it clear I was meant to sit there. And that form of honoring me, of honoring a visitor, of honoring someone who was not a Muslim, struck me as an extraordinary example of Muslim hospitality and welcome and respect for learning. And if I had no other conversation, that would have been sufficient for my trip to New York. It was a wonderful thing. Of course, the other wonderful thing about that trip, in addition to Imam Gulen, was having the opportunity to eat ice cream with you.
Okay, did I lose you there? Ice cream with him or with?
No, with you, sir. With you. I had to defend my ice cream, but I was able to eat it.
Yes, that's a rare treat, of course. Now, in regards to your Catholic teacher, your Jewish teacher, what would you say the main differences were in terms of their styles and what you learned from them?
So the differences were awesome. My teacher, Rabbi Lieberman, was a Jew from Eastern Europe. He was born in Motala. He studied at the yeshiva in Slobodka, and then was able to escape before World War II to live in what was then Palestine, and eventually came to America. So he was always a very pious Orthodox Jew who was old world. My priest, Raymond Brown, was born in Florida and was very much not only an American, but a Vatican II Catholic who believed in modern critical scholarship of the New Testament, but he was also very well schooled in what he would have called the Old Testament, or what I call the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. So they were very, very different in age, in the way they approached the world. But for me, it's been one of the great blessings of my life. And I'm nearing 70 years old, and I'm still counting myself blessed and fortunate to have many great teachers, the newest of whom is Hajj Effendi Gulen, who has taught me both by example and by his writings.
And of course, it's a rare treat to be able to have teachers of different backgrounds, culturally, in this case, and spiritually, religiously. What would be your pointers for those that are in search of an ideal teacher? What should people be doing? Where should they be looking?
I think, let me start by quoting a 2nd century Jewish text, which asks the question, who is the wise man? Who is the sage? And the answer is the person who can learn from everyone. And indeed, I think that's true. Whether it's the person sitting across the table from you, whether it's your children, whether it's a professor, whether it's somebody you work with, there is the opportunity to learn from everyone, because all of us are created in God's image. And because we're created in God's image, we all have something sacred to share with one another and teach one another.
Yes, thank you. Now, in terms of your experiences, and we've mentioned minority faiths, what should be Muslims and Jews be doing here in the United States under these current circumstances? We find ourselves quite isolated. What does your experience tell us in regards to coming together under these difficult circumstances going forward?
I would say the first thing, and it's very important, is that we learn to listen to the medical authorities, to respect them, to really observe social distancing. We can do what we're doing right now, which is we can communicate with one another via Zoom or Skype and still be able to build our relations and learn from one another. And of course, Muslims and Jews both ritually have a well-established ritual of hand washing. And of course, now for the first time, the medical authorities are also urging us to wash our hands. So maybe you don't do wudu with soap, but now we're going to do soap and water and wash our hands and try and stay healthy, and then care for the people who are sick and the people who are hungry, and people will be losing their jobs. And as Jewish and Muslim communities with a tradition of charity, we can help them and we can get them back on their feet.
And my final question as we wrap up our time here, of course, you allude to the difficult issue of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that we find ourselves in recently, particularly here in the New York and New Jersey area, the attacks upon various Jewish communities, businesses and individuals. What do you think may be the cause of the recent spike in such hate over the last year or so, and it's been deadly as well, sadly? What can you tell us about that, Bert?
I think it's partly of a political moment. I think there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who get along by hating other people, and there are people who get along by loving one another. And when you stir up hate, and particularly if you stir up hate and division for political means, it will cause an increase in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And the response to hate must always be loving one another. We can go out, we can do good, we can show by example. And the more we love one another, the better opportunity we have to tamp down that kind of hatred and move forward, not only as Jews and Muslims and Christians, but in this country as Americans as well.
Yes, very important words. Thank you, Rabbi Visotzky.
Thank you for having
me. For those that are watching, you can find Bert's article in the most recent issue of The Fountain, which is the March-April 2020 issue, and the article is titled "Find a Teacher for Yourself." So again,